Hi, it's Katrina. Everyone knows the Egyptians love to mummify people. But did you know they also mummified animals? Fish, crocodiles, birds, baboons, pets? Nobody was safe, not even bugs. Today, I am bringing you the most shocking and bizarre animal mummies ever found in Egypt. Crocodile mummies and the god who loved them. In 2019, a group of archaeologists poking around the cliffs of Kubat al-Hawa, a necropolis perched on the Nile's west bank like an ancient real estate listing with killer views, cracked open an undisturbed tomb and found 10 mummified crocodiles just chilling inside like they were up to no good. There were 10 crocodiles, kind of. There were 5 full bodies and 5 severed heads. And it's not clear if the heads were originally attached to the same bodies. To make things more confusing, there was 0 linen in the tomb. These were mummies without the wrappings, like crocodile jerky. Now, to be clear, ancient Egyptian crocodile mummies are not rare. Egypt had a bit of a phase. I say a phase, but it lasted 3,000 years, in which they embalmed anything that moved, flew, slithered, or crawled. Cats, ibises, shrews, bulls, fish, and even falcons got the mummification treatment. But these 10 crocodile specimens were weirder than a lot of other animal mummies. Weird in that they never had their guts removed. No embalming resin was found inside the tomb. Nothing but sun-dried crocodiles. So what were a bunch of raisin-like crocs doing in a tomb? They were most likely offerings to Sobek, the fertility god of the Nile, who took the form of a crocodile. Sobek was both a terrifying apex predator and a symbol of agricultural success. Imagine praying to a hippo for tax advice. That's the vibe here. The lead scientist on the case was Bea de Coupere from the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences. The crocodiles that Bea and the team found range from 6 to 11.5 feet long. Or, as I prefer, from petting zoo size to run. Curiously, none of the mummies showed the usual signs of clubbing or ritual decapitation that comes with sacrifices. They seem to have died from some pretty brutal causes. Evidence suggests dehydration, suffocation, or heat exposure. Guys, this is a little grim, so you might want to cover your ears for a second. Some of the crocodiles were found with rope impressions on their bodies, suggesting they may have been tied up and left to slow roast into giant reptilian pepperoni sticks. If true, that's pretty gruesome, even by ancient standards. For the Egyptians, it appears the best way to honor a god was to slowly kill the animal that symbolized him. I don't know, seems a little counterintuitive to me. Wouldn't you want to treat the crocodiles like royalty, not leave them in the yard to be baked by the sun? According to Edward Bleiberg, former co-curator at the Brooklyn Museum, animal mummies were like divine direct messages to Egyptian deities. If you wanted the gods' attention, you didn't just pray, you mailed them something with a soul. For example, if you wanted fertile soil on your farm, you had to send a mummified crocodile to the fertility god Sobek. If you were hurt and needed healing, you had to send a mummified cat to the goddess of healing Bastet. Still though, it doesn't explain why this tomb contained 5 heads and 5 bodies. What kind of fertility problem requires 5 mummified crocodile heads and 5 possibly unrelated crocodile bodies? For right now, Bea de Coupere's team plans to confirm the species and date ranges through DNA and radiocarbon testing. That's science's version of checking someone's ID after you've already bought them a drink. But even without the tests, the implications of these crocodile mummies are huge. They are a glimpse into how ancient Egyptians saw death, gods, and their place in a universe that needed constant appeasing. Who is your favorite Egyptian god? Are you a Sobek fan or more Team Osiris? The Empire of Sacrificial Birds. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't a period, it was a comma. The Egyptians worked their whole lives just to transition into death. They thought life was a sort of staging ground for the real adventure that came after the heart stopped beating. And for that reason, the dead didn't travel light. They took with them to the afterlife all kinds of treasures, and whatever they thought might be helpful. That included hiring some spiritual wingmen. Not the kind that help you pick up dates at the bar, but actual winged birds. Across temple precincts and subterranean catacombs, archaeologists have uncovered an astonishing number of bird mummies. Frankly, it's absurd. There are millions of them. Millions, I say. Most were African sacred ibises. and most were probably offered to the god Thoth, who was depicted in ancient artwork as a human man with the head of an ibis. People would often be buried with mummified birds as gifts to Thoth, who they must have thought would be waiting for them on the other side. Thoth even had his own cult. The cult of Thoth, lord of scribes and divine order, was a spiritual industrial complex. Devotees, in acts of piety, offered mummified birds to the god in huge numbers. They took them to their graves, yes, but they also dropped them off at temples. Scientists think it was probably a one bird per prayer situation, sort of like how you get one wish per coin in the wishing well. This ritual of offering gift-wrapped birds spiraled into a national obsession. By the time the dust settled on the late period, around 600 BC, entire catacombs were groaning under the weight of sacrificed ibises. But there's a twist. No one knows where all these dang birds came from. For decades, scholars assumed Egypt must have had massive ibis farms, the avian equivalent of industrial chicken factories. This is the only logical explanation for the sheer number of ibis mummies. And why couldn't the Egyptians have had ibis farms? It's already known that Egyptians bred animals specifically for mummification, such as cats, dogs, and crocodiles, so why not birds? This is exactly what a team of scientists set out to learn under the guidance of Dr. Sally Wassef of Griffith University. They plan to solve the mystery by using ancient DNA analysis. The team extracted genetic material from 40 mummified ibises recovered from 6 different catacomb sites, each about 2,500 years old. Of those 40, 14 yielded full mitochondrial genomes. It was a solid enough sample for comparative analysis. Then, the team sequenced DNA from 26 modern-day sacred ibises across Africa for comparison. The genetic diversity of the ancient mummies matched that of wild birds today, which means that there was no ancient ibis farm. The thing about domestication is that it leaves a fingerprint. When animals are bred in captivity, even for just a few generations, their gene pool shrinks. You get inbreeding, reduced diversity, and a distinct genetic bottleneck. For an example of this, think pugs, dogs that are born in desperate need of medical attention. Seriously, these guys can't even breathe sometimes. These ibises, however, showed no signs of being domesticated. They were as genetically varied as any flock of wild birds today. So then how did the Egyptians catch so many ibises? I'm imagining a bunch of sweaty Egyptians up to their knees in Nile mud, waving around giant butterfly nets in an attempt to catch birds. I mean, sound pretty accurate to you? Or is there an even better explanation? Dr. Sally Wassef has her theory, and it's pretty convincing. Sally said that temple priests ran large-scale bait and capture operations. Swamps, wetlands, and lakes near temples were prime feeding grounds for these majestic birds. Temples may have even been built near swamps specifically for access to the ibises. So then priests at these temples likely had some sort of halfway house set up for birds, fostering an environment where ibises felt safe and secure visiting the temples. Priests would have food out to fatten them up, a sort of Hansel and Gretel scenario. Then, when a bird was big and juicy, they'd be sacrificed to Thoth, wrapped up in bandages, and sold on the open market. Mummified ibises were then used as offerings, whether in a tomb or in a temple. This was not Noah's Ark. This was more like a religious bird sanctuary where the birds all died in the end. Brutal, right? But not everyone is convinced of this catch and sacrifice program. Archaeologist Francisco Bosch Puch of Oxford has excavated thousands of these bird mummies. He argues that some of the birds show signs of trauma consistent with factory farming. I'm talking fractures, twisted limbs, and stress indicators. Could it have been a bit of both? Could there have been priest-run sanctuaries for ibises in some places, and then factory farming hellholes in others? Pontus Skoglund, a leading ancient DNA specialist at the Francis Crick Institute, suggests a hybrid theory. Maybe priests did operate ibis enclosures like holy zookeepers, but allowed wild birds to mingle and breed with the captive population, thereby refreshing the gene pool just enough to avoid their birds becoming as inbred as their pharaohs. The African sacred ibis went extinct in Egypt around 1850. The holiest bird in North Africa ended up going the way of the dodo. Their spiritual successors now live a very different life. Their closest living relative is currently dumpster diving across Australia. The Australian white ibis has become an urban pest. You'll find them at landfills, stealing sandwiches, and earning their charming modern nickname, bin chickens. Basically, garbage birds. Poor guys. Once they were offerings to the gods, now they fight over french fries. It's a fall from grace that Thoth himself might find tragic or hilarious. Who knows what kind of sense of humor an ancient Egyptian god has. Sacred cats and beetles. At Saqqara, the vast necropolis where Egypt's dead never truly sleep, archaeologists have opened yet another chapter in the bizarre and glorious love affair between Egyptians and their animal pantheon. This time, it's cats. So many cats. What archaeologists found is a cat lover's paradise. Dozens of feline mummies, 100 gilded wooden statues, and Bronze Age images of Bastet, the feline-headed goddess of joy, protection, and the home. It's a vault of devotion 4,500 years old, and cats aren't the only thing mummified inside. While the internet is purring over all the incredible ancient cat statues and the overtly creepy mummies, scientists are focused on the beetles. Inside the tomb were mummified scarab beetles, exquisitely preserved, ceremoniously buried, and so rare that even seasoned archaeologists are calling them unheard of. I mean, honestly, how do you even mummify a dung beetle? 2 giant beetle specimens were found nestled within a limestone sarcophagus inside this mysterious tomb, sealed for millennia and adorned with symbolic beetle carvings. So there were beetles carved into the sarcophagus and stashed inside of it. Another cache packed with additional scarab mummies was also uncovered within the tomb. This is amazing because while scarab amulets are everywhere in Egyptian archaeology, actual scarab mummies are almost mythological in their rarity. It would have dropped jaws to find one, but archaeologists found heaps. Egyptians loved scarabs. To the Egyptians, scarabs weren't just bugs. They weren't just dung beetles pushing balls of waste across the desert sands. For the Egyptians, they were sacred metaphors. Each day, the sun god Ra was believed to push the sun across the sky like a celestial dung beetle rolls its ball of dirt. Because of this story, the scarab became the ultimate symbol of rebirth, cosmic order, and eternal renewal. It was the most important symbol of ancient Egypt, next to maybe the Ankh. Yet with this discovery, it turns out the scarab was more than symbolism. Some of these beetles were actually embalmed, revered, and buried like kings. It looks like these scarabs had their own sarcophagus. Who in their right mind builds a giant human-sized coffin for a bug? Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, said, "I never heard about them before." Coming from one of Egypt's top archaeologists, that's saying something. I wasn't messing around when I said scarab mummies are rare. Now let's wash our hands of these bugs and get back to the cats. The tomb's feline inventory reads like an ancient gallery of whiskered divinity. Scientists found 100 gilded cat statues, dozens of cat mummies, and a bronze icon of Bastet, the goddess who could purr you to sleep or claw your eyes out, depending on the day. The cats found here weren't somebody's pets, not in any kind of cuddly way at least. By the time the Saqqara necropolis became a center for animal cults, Egyptians had industrialized mummification. Kittens were bred, killed, embalmed, and sold to pilgrims by the millions as divine offerings. If you wanted Bastet's blessing, you bought a cat mummy. It was spiritual capitalism at its purring peak. In fact, the cat mummy trade became so absurd that in the 1800s, British entrepreneurs bought tons of cat mummies, ground them up, and used them as fertilizer. Somehow, it was cheaper to buy cat mummies from Egypt than it was to buy real fertilizer in England. Which means that right now, Bastet's children are still sprinkled amidst the soil of English farms. Ancient blessings turned compost. If you've ever eaten a carrot from the UK, it may have grown in cat mummy soil. Not sure how I feel about that one. Okay, so we've got a tomb full of cats and beetles. Surely there can't be any other weird animals lost in this tomb, right? Surely there were no mummified cobras uncovered in multiple sarcophagi, right? Actually, there were totally cobra mummies. On top of the beetles and felines, archaeologists also found statues of a cow, falcon, and lion, plus sarcophagi containing mummified cobras and crocodiles. Each animal had its own special divine affiliation. Falcons were associated with Horus, the sky god and protector of kings. Cobras were associated with Wadjet, the guardian god of Lower Egypt. Lions were associated with Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing, and a sort of sister deity of Bastet. And lastly, cows were closely tied to Hathor, the bovine motherly goddess of joy, love, and drunken festivals. And let's not forget the 1,000 ceramic amulets, writing tools, jars, and several human burials tucked around the chamber, all mingling together in a cocktail of the sacred, the magical, and the eerily preserved. But why? Why shove humans, cats, cobras, and scarabs into one tomb? Whose tomb was it? Do archaeologists even know it's a tomb? What if it's a ritual chamber or a divine warehouse for offerings to multiple gods? That's the thing. Archaeologists are only guessing. They don't know what this chamber was for, only that it's full of mummies, treasures, and 4,500 years of secrets. Meat for the afterlife. Mummified pharaohs are standard discoveries in Egypt. So are mummified cats. They're about as predictable as the weather outside your window, but mummified beef ribs sealed with luxury coffin varnish and basted in animal fat for eternity? That's the lunch you didn't know you needed. Welcome to the weird and wonderful world of meat mummies. Alongside mummified humans and mummified animals are mummified lunchboxes. Recent chemical analyses of ancient funerary meats has shown that Egyptians sent their dearly departed into the afterlife with fully prepped, high-status snacks, mummified with care and seasoning. Forget Tupperware. The ancient Egyptians gave their kings and nobles vacuum-sealed meals designed for immortality, preserved with fat, resin, and enough chemical wizardry to last over 3 millennia. Researchers from the UK and Egypt analyzed 4 samples of embalmed meat offerings discovered in tombs across the Nile Valley. The offerings included 2 racks of beef ribs, 1 slab of duck, and several slices of goat meat. Anyone feeling a little snackish, or are you going to skip the goat? These were deliberate, packaged offerings presented as part of the deceased's eternal provisions, like Lunchables. The meats were wrapped in linen, coated in resins and fats, and sealed like precious relics, because to the Egyptians, that's exactly what they were. The oldest of these delicious time capsules was found in the tomb of a noble couple dating to roughly 1386 BC, during the reign of Amenhotep III. The latest was buried around 845 BC during Egypt's third intermediate period. It was a time of political chaos, but also still a good era for mummified goat snacks. The meat was prepared very, very well. Barbecue, anyone? The goat slices were preserved with a simple fat coating like an ancient marinade, sealing in the spiritual juices and goat flavors. Meanwhile, the beef ribs were coated with a sophisticated balm of animal fat mixed with imported resin, the same kind of resin used in royal coffin varnishes. The juicier the flavor, the more important the mummy. The opulence of a person's embalmed snack pack reflected their status in life and their expected status in death. That's one thing a lot of people don't realize about the Egyptians. They thought that labels, jobs, and social status transferred over to the afterlife, sort of like transferring over a save file. So if you were a peasant in life, you would be a peasant in death. And if you were rich in life, you'd be rich in the afterlife. And that's why you had to be buried with mummified beef ribs. The more extravagant the meal, the more important the dearly departed. What's particularly remarkable is the thoughtfulness. The animal parts were cooked, sliced, portioned, and embalmed as ready-to-eat dishes. Prior to the coffin resin being applied, you could actually eat the dish. In tombs of poor people, they had to paint their meals on the walls, but wealthy Egyptians needed the real thing, and that's where meat mummies came into play. In some tombs, entire rooms were designated to store and preserve foodstuffs, including wine jars, grain sacks, and wrapped meats ready for consumption in the field of reeds. Are you hungry yet? Do you want to be buried with snacks? The 1,000-year worship of the Ram God King. Abydos is an ancient city older than memory and sacred since the dawn of dynasties. Abydos was part necropolis, part spiritual motherboard, the traditional burial place of Osiris, and a bustling city, all rolled into one. It was here that King Ramses II, the Pharaoh of Pharaohs, chose to build his grand temple to the gods, and in classic pharaonic fashion, to himself. King Ramses II ruled during the New Kingdom's glittering 19th dynasty from 1279 to 1213 BC. His reign was one of colossal temples, epic battles, and statues so massive you'd think he was trying to impress alien archaeologists. A living god in his own time, Ramses wasn't just remembered after his death like Queen Victoria or Genghis Khan. He was venerated, as in worshipped like a god, for 1,000 years after he kicked the canopic jar. And now, in a discovery that is shaking the foundations of Egyptian religious history, we know just how literal that worship was. More than 2,000 mummified ram heads have been found at Abydos. They were unearthed in and around the Temple of Ramses II by a team from New York University's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. These aren't random animal bones tossed in a pile like some prehistoric mammoth makeout spot. These 2,000 mummified heads are perfectly preserved and ceremoniously prepared, hinting at what must have been the ritual to end all rituals. You've heard of sacrifices before, a cat here, a dog there, a couple of ibises for the grave, but 2,000 decapitated rams is a sacrificial slaughter, something unprecedented in Egyptian history. To make things weirder, the heads aren't even really from ancient Egypt. They all date to the Ptolemaic period, between 332 and 30 BC. That's a solid 1,000 years after Ramses II died, closer to the death of Cleopatra and the rise of Roman Egypt. The implications are unmistakable. The ram heads prove that the deified version of Ramses II was still being worshipped centuries after the fall of the New Kingdom. Ramses must have truly become a god to the Egyptian people. He was being worshipped while the Persians invaded, while Alexander the Great rolled on by. His temple became a pilgrimage site, and the preferred tribute was, you can probably guess, ram's heads. People brought mummified ram heads as offerings to a god king who hadn't breathed in 10 centuries. And here I am just praying someone will leave a flower on my grave. Just one, that's fine. Dr. Sameh Iskander, head of the NYU mission, revealed the staggering extent of the find. The ram heads, likely votive offerings, were discovered in a massive storage chamber beneath the northern portion of the temple complex. Nearby, archaeologists also found mummified goats, dogs, cows, deer, and even an ostrich. This was a Noah's Ark of sacred taxidermy. These animals weren't sacrifices in the bloody sense. They weren't killed to satisfy some brutal blood god. In Egypt, these animals were sacred offerings and had to be treated with respect. But apparently, this is why they were wrapped in linen, sometimes painted, often adorned with decorations, and then laid before the lingering spirit of Ramses the Great. To put it simply, this was a divine gift shop of animal mummies. And the most common offering was the ram, a beast long associated with Khnum, the ram-headed god of creation, water, and fertility. By the Ptolemaic period, Khnum's divine energy seems to have fused with the cult of Ramses in Abydos, producing something altogether different. It wasn't quite Ramses, but not quite Khnum either. When they joined together, their cults created a localized hybrid worship of the king as something more than mortal, more than king, and almost more than a god. None of this is particularly shocking coming from the Egyptians. The only part that really has me floored is the length of time. For 1,000 years, this dead king was worshipped as a god. I mean, that's so long. And they had no Wikipedia to keep their facts straight the whole time. Did they even know they were worshipping by the end? And why rams? I'll tell you. In ancient Egypt, the ram was the essence of divine masculinity. The animal was seen as a symbol of virility, leadership, strength, and cosmic fertility. The god Khnum, one of Egypt's oldest deities, was depicted with a ram's head. Myth has it he shaped humanity on a potter's wheel using clay from the Nile, quite literally forming people from the earth. If that reminds anyone of the Bible, it's kind of similar. God made Adam from the earth. Khnum made man from the earth too. He was seen as the source of the Nile's life-giving waters, and so, by extension, rams became symbols of creation, agriculture, kingship, and rebirth. Ramses II, meanwhile, had long cultivated his image as divine. Even while alive, he was treated like a living god. By aligning his temple with Abydos, Osiris, and the cult of Khnum, His legacy became something immortal. When lions slept with pharaohs. In the ancient sands of Egypt, the line between the sacred and the zoological has always been deliciously blurry. The gods had animal heads, the tombs had animal bones, and the living paid tribute to the dead with mummified birds, snakes, and apparently baby lions. In 2019, Egyptian archaeologists announced a find that startled even the most ruthless tomb raiders. 5 linen-wrapped big cats were unearthed in the vast Saqqara necropolis just south of Cairo. Big cats, as in lions, roaring, ferocious, majestic lions. CT scans revealed something unprecedented about these oversized cats. 2 of the feline bundles were confirmed to be young lions, the first ever complete mummified lion cubs found in Egypt. This was a big deal. For a culture that mummified everything from insects to their neighbor's cat, you would think that lions, the apex predator of the African savanna, would be top-tier offerings. Hey, if I were a goddess, I'd think I'd rather a whole lion than a measly shrew. And yet very few, as in less than 5 lion mummies have ever been discovered. One was found by a French archaeologist in 2004. Another was found in that tomb I mentioned earlier that was full of regular-sized cats. Now archaeologists have a whole tomb full of lions, complete with young cubs, and they were just the feral tip of a colossal ritual iceberg. The tomb's contents were a riot of animal devotion, a stunning zoo of the damned. Among the finds were 75 bronze and wooden statues of cats, many gilded or inlaid. Each one is worth a fortune. There were 25 richly painted wooden boxes, each containing a mummified cat curled into eternal slumber. These were regular-sized cats, by the way. And then there were way more mummies. Like so many mummies, I can't get over it. Scientists found a menagerie of crocodiles, cobras, ibises, falcons, mongooses, and bulls, all embalmed with reverence, and a few preserved scarab beetles too, just for good measure. Now, if you were going to be buried in ancient Egypt and had a whole petting zoo of animals mummified and ready to join you in the afterlife, what else would you need? Probably a bronze statue of Osiris, god of the underworld, right? Or how about 73 of them? Because that's how many were in this tomb. Along with 6 statues of Ptah Soker, a funerary god, 11 statues of Sekhmet, the lion-headed war goddess, and 1 statue of Neith, the primordial goddess of creation and war, who may have predated most of the Egyptian pantheon. And don't even get me started on the loot. There were amulets, mummy masks, papyrus scrolls, drawings of the goddess Tawert, and all kinds of other artifacts. One item even contained the name King Psamtik I, who ruled Egypt between 610 and 664 BC. It makes you wonder who could have afforded so much treasure and a dump truck full of mummies. Once removed from the gloom of their resting place, the big cats were CT scanned and digitally dissected. The 2 lion cubs were identified based on vertebrae length, limb proportions, and cranial shape. Their bones were still developing, which suggests they were only a few months old at death. Let's not talk too much about the tragedy of sacrificing something at peak cuteness. The other 3 feline mummies are still technically unclassified. They are most likely lions, but there could be a lioness or 2 in there. Then again, scientists say they could be leopards, cheetahs, or panthers. All 3 are species never before found in mummified form in Egypt. But there's a first time for everything. The context behind these lion cubs is as fascinating as the discovery itself. According to Egyptologist Dr. Salima Ikram of the American University in Cairo, people would make devotional offerings in the form of animals as mummies. This would have more potency as a blood sacrifice compared to stone or wooden images. In other words, why carve a falcon when you can kill one? By the late period, especially during the 26th dynasty, this practice reached an overwhelming scale. Entire animal species were bred, traded, purchased, or captured purely for sacrifice. Studies have confirmed the presence of massive cat, dog, and crocodile breeding facilities, essentially factory farms for sacred death. However, there is no evidence that lions were bred this way. Their size, diet, and danger likely made them too expensive to breed in large numbers. I won't even guess how many people got their limbs ripped off trying. Researchers suspect that lions may have been captured when young, and then raised just long enough to make them sacred before sacrificing them in the name of Sekhmet or even Mummies. Mummies was another lion-headed god thought to be a mix between Bastet and Ra. The gods, Egypt, mummies, the whole thing was a bizarre blend of religion and economy that hasn't really been seen since. And Saqqara was ground zero. The Saqqara necropolis, long overshadowed by the pyramids of Giza, has been making headlines lately for reasons that go far beyond cat mummies. In the years leading up to and following this discovery, archaeologists have uncovered a tidal wave of revelations in the area. They uncovered a 4,400-year-old untouched tomb belonging to a man named Watier, whose wall-covered resume described him as a royal purification priest, royal supervisor, and inspector of the sacred boat. But still, nobody knows what his actual job was. They also found a beautifully painted 2,000-year-old catacomb believed to house dozens of high-ranking burials, and a 2,500-year-old silver death mask, partially gilded in gold and tucked inside a noble's burial. All of these finds reinforce what experts have long suspected, that Saqqara was a theological nerve center, a place where human and divine, animal and god, life and afterlife intertwined in eternal drama. And now, thanks to 5 silent, linen-wrapped kitty cats, the experts are forced to reassess their understanding of Egypt's religious menagerie. The lion, long a symbol of Pharaoh's power, but rarely a subject of sacrifice, has entered the sacred slaughterhouse. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite mummified animal? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Bye!